Thanks for joining us on a Wednesday afternoon. Hopefully it's not too stormy out your way. Hopefully the rain hasn't started yet, but if it did, well, you can have a nice, dry, fun vacation inside today, painting palm trees. So I'm going to go over our supplies, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, like Lorraine said, just pop it in the chat box and she will um, ask me all her questions or all your questions, and I'm happy to explain anything 2 or 3 times, how many ever times it takes for you to understand. All right, so we've got a cup of water and we've got our paints. These were tube paints, but I like to squirt my tube paints into these pans. I leave them open for a day or two to dry, and then you can shut it and bring it with you wherever you go. And then I just wet them when I'm ready to use them. You can wet them with a spray bottle, with a dropper, or I just grab some water and kind of sprinkle it on the paints. I have a paper towel to get rid of any excess water, and I'm using round brushes. This is a size 5, this is a size 6. They are 2 different brands. Different brands vary. Sometimes you'll find a size 6 and another brand is as big as my thumb. So, it changes. So don't worry about that. Then we've got paper. My preference is 140-pound paper. And yeah, I guess you can't see that. It's textured. It's called cold press. I prefer cold press paper, but you can also use hot press, which is smooth, almost like Bristol board. But this 140-pound paper will accept more water than, say, if you were to paint on drawing paper or the stuff that you use to print documents on. So this will take a lot of scrubbing with your brush, a lot of layers of paint, and it'll buckle slightly, but not really. I used a lot of water on this and it's perfectly flat after it dries out. So today we are going to paint a palm tree. There's also another little style of palm tree down here. If we have time, we'll get to that guy too. But this is what we're focusing on today. These are going to be your basic strokes, and I'll show you how we make these little hatch marks. And our techniques today are wet on wet. This is wet on slightly wet. This is wet on very wet. And you'll see here, when it's wet on very wet, it almost blobs into one color, whereas this one stays a little more separate because we let the color below dry a little bit more, but not fully dry. If you let it dry completely, you'll see that you can write a whole word and nothing is going to bleed out like these. That color is not going to spread anywhere, and I'll explain more about that as we go. So I'm going to leave our sample here so you guys can see. I'm going to stick this piece of paper here so that we don't see that halo reflecting on my desktop, and I'm going to paint on here. I'm going to rip my paper off just so it's easier for me to move around. And don't be afraid while you're painting to move your paper any way you need to. It's much easier than having to move your arm. We don't want anybody, ow, that was a really awkward angle. We don't want anybody to dislocate a shoulder or a wrist. All right, so to get ready to paint, you want to get your brush nice and wet. If you have a brand new brush from the store, you're going to want to really smush that into your water to get all of the sizing that's on the brush. They put a tiny little bit of glue on the brush so that they don't get damaged during transit. Okay, so then you're just going to dab your water off on the side, unless you need to wet your paint, and in that case, you'll get a nice blob of water on there and just tap it into your paint. So for today, I'm using a more yellow green. So if you have a green, you can go ahead and mix a little extra yellow into it. If you don't have a green, mix yellow and blue together, but mix more yellow into it. And then we're also going to use a darker bluer green. And so we're going to do I added in a little bit more blue and also a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of black to my green just to darken it up. Of course, if you have colors that are already pre-mixed, this color is close to Viridian, which comes in most kits. So if you have that, go ahead and use it. If not, no big deal. We can mix up any color that we want.
Kris, what size brush do you recommend?
I have a size 6 here, and in most brands, a size 6 will work, but the important part about it is that I have a round brush. You can certainly use a flat brush, but you'll have a little bit tougher time with it. You're going to want something that's round and that comes to a point. This one is a silver black velvet, and if you've taken class with me before, you'll realize that I've been using this for a couple of months now. I was testing it out. I really like it. I wasn't sure about it at first, but I like it. The one that I like a lot, and I was very excited. I was watching a video by a very fancy watercolor artist, and she was using this brush, and I was so excited. So it's a Simply Simmons brush, and you can get these at Michael's, and they're like $1.99 or $2.99. They are made for acrylic paint, but I think they handle watercolor beautifully. This is a size 4, but you can see not too much different from the 6. So Simply Simmons is probably my #1 pick, but I do like the silver black velvet, and this one is a Princeton Velvet Touch. I really like that too. And this is a 5, so you can see. A 6 you can do a lot with. So here, I'll show you really quickly, just to get on the brush train. If you press lightly with your brush, really light pressure, you can get the thinnest line. I mean, you can barely even see that, how thin that is there, right? And if you push a little harder, you get a thicker line. If you push really hard, you get an even thicker line. It's so hard to see that first line. That's so funny. So look at how many different thicknesses I got out of one brush. And also, you can also use your brush this way by laying it flat, and you get an even thicker line. So you can, there's a lot of versatility with one size of brush. So I'm going to show you the techniques today first, and then we're going to get into this brush stroke, and then we're going to create our palm tree. I keep wanting to call it a coconut tree and not a palm tree because I grew up with coconut palms. And so I sort of, in my brain, I think I refer to all palms as coconut trees. But so forgive me if I say coconut tree accidentally. All right, so for my yellow green, I'm just going to take some green, any green that I have, maybe multiple greens. And notice I'm rinsing my brush between colors because you don't want to get your colors muddy and mixed up with other colors in there. And then I'm going to take some yellow. Now these paints are really dry, so I can really push my brush in to pick up paint. If your paint is freshly squeezed out, you just want to dab the tip of your brush in there because you'll grab too much paint on your brush. And I'm just mixing those two colors together until I get a green that looks pleasing to me. By all means, if you want to paint a purple palm tree, knock yourself out. If you want to paint a pink palm tree, that would be pretty too. But I'm just going to go with traditional green today. And then I'm going to mix up my darker green shade. And occasionally I might just dip into other colors to vary a little bit. But really, the two greens are all that you need. I'm adding a little bit of black and a little bit of navy blue. And that's how I got my darker green and my lighter green. And I'm going to rinse my brush off because I want to start, well, you know what? Yeah, I do want to start with my lighter green. So all I'm going to do is pick up some paint on my brush. Now, you can see that there's a fair amount of water in here, right? You can see that moving around. So don't be afraid to add water to your paint. You can always let things dry and go over it with another layer if it's too light, like if you added too much water, but it's a little more difficult to wash things out a little bit. So don't be afraid to add water to your watercolor. All right, so our first technique is going to be the wet on dry. Sorry, the wet on wet. Oh my goodness. My brain. And I'm just painting a square. Now, I have loaded my brush with paint. If I hold my brush vertically, I can see that the brush is wet and full of water, but it's not so full of water that it's streaming off or even beading up at the end of my brush. So that's one tip. I get a lot of people asking how much water to use. And honestly, it depends on what you're painting, but that's a good starting point. That will give you enough paint on your brush to be able to move things around without getting any lines on there. And then you just want to manipulate that paint by moving your brush around to get your square as even as possible. You could do a circle if you want, but I'm just doing some sort of rectangular square thing. Okay, so this is quite shiny. You can see that light reflecting on there. It's very shiny, but if I were to hold my paper vertically, the water is not rushing down. If I had too much water on there that it was a dome on here, that would be too wet. And that's the effect you would get with that. Almost all the colors mixed together. I'm going to rinse my brush off, and it's still nice and shiny, but if I do this, no water is moving around. It's just shiny. Then I'm going to take my darker color on my brush. And whenever I go into my paint, I always tend to keep mixing it up because sometimes some colors settle. And then I just dab a little bit off on the side. These wells are a little bit raised on the edge. And then I'm just going to take the tip of my brush and tap into this paint. And because it's wet, do you see how that paint's spreading out? It's not spreading a ton, but it's spreading. The more wet the paint is on the bottom, that lighter green, the more it'll spread. See what a fun effect that is? It almost looks like a little tiny abstract painting all in itself. Imagine doing this on like a whole piece of paper with a bunch of different colors. That would be pretty. Now, if I were to make a really wet square, I'll show you what that looks like when you use too much water. I'm going to make a really, really wet square. Actually, forgive me, but I'm going to make a square here and let this one dry for this technique. I got too excited to show you. So I'm going to kind of push some of that paint around, dab my brush on my paper towel, because I do want this to dry. So just dabbing off on my paper towel. That makes my brush thirsty and it's going to pick up any extra water on there because I do want this one to dry. All right, so we're back to making big puddle. I needed to mix up some more paint. And don't be afraid to mix up more paint in the middle of your painting because I rarely mix enough. If you want to make sure that it's completely the same all the way through the painting, you might want to get a little pot to mix your colors in. Okay, so I want to use a lot of water on this one. And I'm going to paint a very wet square. It's hard for me to even paint a super wet square because I'm usually aware of how much water I use. So I want to grab a lot of paint, kind of blob it on there. And when you mix up your paint with water like this, it's called making a wash with your paint. Okay, All right, I like my square. Very wet. We'll add more water. Okay, now if I pick this up, you can see that the paint is moving down and making a puddle on the bottom. So that's really, really wet. I mean, there's a lot of water in there. I'm going to add more so you could see it. Do you see how that's moving around? I can't leave it bent too long because you see how that's moving? That's way too much water. So I'll show you what happens when I mix my other color into here. I'm going to tap my color in just like I did before. And you're going to see that it's going to start spreading out even more. And if you move your paper, your color is going to move. Do you see that? And eventually it's going to just kind of like mix together so that it looks almost like one color. For some applications, that might be fine. For today, we can do a mixture of both. It just depends. All right, because you'll notice on here, I have some way wetter areas where all the little strokes kind of ran together, and then you have areas where they're more separate. So we're going to have a mixture of both on there. Wow, that's really wet. See? So if I were to hold it, do you see how that's moving? It's kind of a fun effect, kind of a fun activity. All right, this is still a little bit wet, so I'm going to wait another minute or so. Does anybody have any questions about the wet on wet technique?
No questions yet, Kris, but if you do have a question, feel free to type it in the chat box.
All right. My goodness, that's just so much fun. I could sit here and do this forever and just move it around. The watercolor techniques are something that's just very fun to sit and try. You can take all your different brushes and put different pressure on there to see what shapes you can come up with your brushes, and then do your techniques with different colors and experiment with your paint. And that's a lot of fun. Okay, so this square, it's definitely raised, like my paper is buckled, so it's still a little bit wet, but we're going to give it maybe 30 seconds more, and then I'll show you the wet on dry technique. Okay, so I'm just taking some paint, and I just want it to be a little darker than this, so I'm mixing a small puddle over here. It's another reason I really like this palette, because there's so many different areas to mix your paint. And this palette, I think maybe Michael's has something like it, but I got this one at blick.com. blick.com. That's where I get a lot of my art supplies. I should probably ask them to sponsor me at this point. It's kind of like a wonderland for art supplies, honestly. Okay, so I'm just gonna write the word dry on here. And you'll notice I'm putting that second coat of color and it's not spreading like this one or that one is. It's staying put. It's not going anywhere. And that's because we let the bottom layer dry. So this is the wet on dry technique, the wet on wet technique, and this is also wet on wet, except like extremely wet. And so these are the techniques that we're going to use for this, and we're going to go into the strokes. I'm going to use the darker color so you guys can see. So for the palm tree, they all come off of a main branch. Whether your branch is, you know, slightly bent like that or super bent like that, that's how you're going to start it. And what you want to do is make these feather-like strokes, meaning I'm not pushing my brush down. When I make a stroke with my brush, I'm bracing with my palm, the side of my palm, and I'm moving these 3 fingers. Kind of like you're writing, except you're bracing your hand, and that just gives you some control. It's almost like using chopsticks a little bit, right? You just move these fingers, and you want to just start at the top and just make these feather-like little strokes. Now they're not straight up and down like that. They're slightly curved. See? Slightly curved. And you're just going to follow that the whole way down the branch, like so. And some of them I'm letting them touch, some of them I'm keeping separate. Now I'm doing this with the darker green so you can see how to create those strokes. And then when you come to the top, you could kind of just follow that line that you started and then just create a stroke. And that's how you get one of the branches. There, that shows you a little bit better. Now, when you look through a palm tree branch, you can see some of the branches that are on the other side, because on either side of the stalk, there are these little tiny leaves that come off of it. And those kind of look like they're going in the opposite direction. So you just want to do a few in the opposite direction. So you get a little bit of a crisscross effect happening there, like so. And I will do this over and over again, so don't worry about it if you don't get it the first time. And also sometimes, depending on, you know, there's a lot of wind that's moving these branches around, you might see a few on the top. And the way you do that is just kind of like make a little arc. You're not seeing the full thing. They're sort of hidden behind there. You don't even have to do these, but if you want to do it in a couple spots, you can. Okay, so what I did for this is that I went through with my light green, and then I went over it in a couple of spots with my darker green. The only reason I did this in dark green was so that you can see the strokes. I'm going to do it one more time, and then I will go into showing you how to do the bark, and then we'll fill in the leaves. So again, so your leaves are going to have different shapes, because it's a palm tree. It's getting blown about by the wind, and they're very droopy leaves, right? Droopy branches rather, and they go in different directions. Some go to the right, some go to the left, some go down. So let's do one here. I'm gonna do one that kind of goes down a little bit like that. And again, feathery strokes, so I'm bracing my hand, just moving these fingers. Very light pressure. So I'm not going like this with heavy pressure. I'm not pushing down on my brush. Only the tip of my brush is touching that paper in light feather-like strokes, like that. And you just want to curve it slightly, and you just want to follow that line, right? You want to follow that line. If a couple of them blob together, don't worry about it. That kind of adds to the fun. And then when you come to the end, you just flick it down. So you're flicking your brush is what you're doing. Just flick your brush very easily, like so. And then a couple of the ones in the back are going to peekaboo through, so you want to do it in the opposite direction. They kind of look funny all by themselves. They look kind of like crazy eyelashes or eyebrows, but when you put them all together, it makes sense. Does anybody have any questions about this before I go on to doing the bark or the base of the tree? I will show you how it comes together after, but does anybody have any questions about painting the little individual leaves off of the branch before I move forward?
No questions yet, Kris.
Awesome. So I mix up a brown for the base. If you have a brown, go ahead and use the brown straight out of the tube if you want to. But I just mix a little orange with some blue. And that gives me my brown. If it gets too orangey, add a little more blue. And if you want, you can add a little black to make like a darker brown if you want to. I never mix up enough for some reason. Probably because I don't have a empty large well, but add a little bit of that yellowier orange. All right, so I have a brown all mixed up. Does anybody want me to slow down and mix the brown again, or do we all have a brown paint? Okay, so I'm going to go forward. If anybody changes their mind about that, just let me know. All right, so with palm trees, they're not ever super straight. There's usually some little bend in it. So it's more or less straight here, but it's also tilted, and then the top is tilted a little bit more. Now, if you want to make it an arc, you absolutely can do that because they're very bendy trees. Which is why if you ever see a picture of somebody sitting under a palm tree / coconut tree in a vacation brochure, please don't do that. Coconuts are heavy and they can knock you out. So I think it's very.
There's a request to slow down just a little bit.
Okay, so they can be swoopy or they can be straight. So or not super straight, but slightly bent. Okay. All right. So what you want to do first, I'm going to get a fresh piece of paper here. Swap these guys out. Okay. Make sure you have enough water on your brush because you want things to move around. We're going to make ours slightly swoopy. How about that? So I'm just going to draw a little bit of an arc. And so it's thinner on the top and it gets thicker as you go down. Not super thick, right? And you don't have to be precious about making these lines straight at all because we're going to stair step them. And then at the bottom, they usually get a little bit kind of round. Just going to add a little more water to my brush, and then I'm just going to fill that in. And you might have to scrub a little bit with your brush if the lines you put down dried already, which is why you use a lot of water so that you keep things workable. So I have that all nice and filled in. Now, coconut bark, the trunk of it, oh, focus, there we go. The trunk of the coconut tree is textured, kind of makes it easier to climb up. So it's textured. So what you want to do just make sort of a little shape like that, like a backwards L almost, that's a little angled. And then you can make another one under it. You don't want to go out too far. So keep making your backwards L's. You know, as many as you want, like so. And then do the same thing on the other side. The only reason that looks darker is because I use a lot more paint on there. So you do the same thing on the other side, like so. Are we following so far?
Looks good, Kris. Everyone's busy painting.
Okay. And that's how you get that texture on there. And then you want to just darken up one edge just a little bit. And then you want to take the tip of your brush and kind of connect those lines using an arc, somewhat of an arc. So you have your two well, this one's a backwards L, this is a perfect L. Now you just kind of connect it with a little curve like that. See how that's coming together? And I'm going to rinse my brush out because I don't want them to be super harsh. And I'm just going to take my brush, kind of run my brush along the edge just to soften it up a little bit. Because right now there's no color in between the L and the tree trunk that we painted before. And don't be afraid to scrub your brush back and forth, because the paper can take it. This 140-pound paper can take it. If you were using drawing paper, watercolor wouldn't be such a great idea. You can do it, but the paper will buckle. And if you want to soften up the line just a little bit, you can just run your clean brush around it too. You don't have to. I only did it in a couple spots. I'm going to leave the others. Now, it got a little bit solid on the bottom here, and I like it kind of washed out. So I'm just going to take clean water on my brush and just kind of scrub at that line up and down a little bit. You could have done that in the beginning if you wanted to, or if you want it solid, you can leave it solid. You know, maybe you can draw two of them side by side and paint a little hammock in the middle.
Okay, so Kris said, someone said, I'm not getting the fine lines. The black lines are just blending with the brown color.
So then your paint below must have been too wet.
Yeah, that's what she thought. Okay.
Yeah. So just let it dry a little bit, and then you can do that part. I'm mixing up a little more brown. I didn't mix enough. So also you'll notice on a palm tree, it's very textured, the trunk, and that's almost the same stroke that we did for this, except this one was curved and this one's straight. So I'm just going to brace my hand, and you can wait for it to dry, or my middles are dry, but the ends are wet. So I'm going to avoid the end and just kind of place a few quick strokes in between the wet areas. So having trouble focusing on those thin little lines.
You can see it looks like an elephant's trunk.
It does. And so where my paint was wet, if my paintbrush touches it, it does that. It kind of blends off into it. And I think those things are kind of fun looking, so I just leave it. Now, watercolor, if you've not used it before, will dry a lot lighter than you think. And I'm just going to put a few little strokes on here too, just to add a little bit of texture. Like that. So the watercolor will dry a lot lighter than you think. So when it's completely dry, after we've put the branches on, you can go back in there and darken things up, and we'll do that after. Does anybody want me to paint another trunk so you can see that again? I think I'll do that.
Yes, someone's.
All right. Now I'm going to try to mix up a little more paint so I don't run out. So that's very orange. I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to pick up some blue. You'll notice sometimes I go into my darker colors without rinsing my brush. You could kind of sort of do that, but it's better to rinse your brush. She says as she dips into the light color without rinsing her brush. Do as I say, not as I do. So sometimes I go back and forth between the blue and the orange until I get the shade of brown that I need. Oops, too much blue. There we go. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of black to darken that up. And we're going to go and do another. I got a little bit of brown on my orange. It's fine. Now, if you, or let's say for instance, your kids get loose and they mix up your paint colors and don't rinse their brushes, let that dry and then you can run it under the faucet for a few seconds and it'll take off the top layer of paint and everything will be back to normal. So don't worry too much about that. All right. Maybe I'll make one going this way. So what you want to do, make sure you have enough water in there. You want to draw an arc. Another side, thinner on top. And then as I come down, I'm just going to widen it slightly. Just slightly. It's not like a hugely noticeable. The base gets wider. Kind of make a little bulb. Oh, this brown is a lot darker than the other one. And then you want to fill it in. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but my paper is kind of resisting my paint a little bit. Like you see how it skipped there? Sometimes papers will do that. Even expensive ones sometimes will do that. You just want to scrub your brush back and forth until it takes the paint. This is a new kind of paper that I'm trying out. And you know what? Some sheets didn't do it at all and some sheets did. So I can't say that it's a brand specific or type specific thing. And now we're going to roughen up those edges. So I'm not being too precious like that. Skipped a little bit there. Perfect. It'll lend to the effect that we're looking for. Now, this time I'm going to blend out the bottom of this base just a little bit. And to blend things out, you want to clean your brush with clean water. Get most of the water off, but the brush is still wet. And then you just kind of wiggle your brush. And the paint will mix with that water that's on the brush and it will blend out. Should we have a class of techniques one day? Just all techniques, how to do everything, like Watercolor 101? You guys want that? We can certainly do that.
I personally love that idea.
Yeah,
Basic.
I think that is, oh yeah, basic.
Someone's asking if they have to, hold on a second. Hold on a second. Yeah, everyone's saying sure, yeah. Do I have to make my own green?
You don't have to. If you have greens that already exist, you can totally use that. There's no cheating with using pre-mixed paint, absolutely. So if you'll notice on my palette, I have several greens. I like my what's called convenience greens, which are greens that come in the tube, but you'll often find that they don't really mimic nature. You have to manipulate them by adding in a little bit of yellow, a little bit of orange, sometimes a little bit of red even, the navy blue, brown, black. But I always start with a base of a lot of greens to mix my greens. So you can mix it, or you can have pre-made green. And if you don't love your pre-made green, you can always mix, you can have some mix-ins. Actually, mixing greens is like a whole class in itself to mix fun greens that'll work with nature, because if you're outside in the spring, you'll notice that the greens look a little different from the greens that you see around the holidays, or, you know, in the fall, you'll see all these different shades. Like I love that spring green that you see when everything's just starting to sprout early in the year. And if you walk around your neighborhood, there are so many different bushes and trees, and you'll often notice that there are tons of different shades of green if you're paying attention, and it's kind of fun to look at, honestly. Or maybe I'm just strange. I'm always taking pictures of like shrubs and plants. I'm surprised nobody's yelled at me for taking a picture of their garden yet. All right, so after we've got this base down, we want to do the texture that those palm trees are known for, right? So all along the side, on this side, we're going to create little backwards L's, except instead of it being a straight L, it's a little bit angled. So what's going to happen, it's going to kind of stair step like that. Does that help a little bit more? All right, so we're going to start at the top, angle out just a little bit. Just angle out just a little bit. And then in, like so. And then you want to come below that, angle out, and then in. And then you want to keep doing that the whole way down. You don't want to get too far away from the edge because you'll end up with a thick trunk, and palm trees don't have thick trunks. And then on the opposite side, it's not going to be a backwards L, it's going to be a regular L, but then don't forget to keep your angle happening. So it's going to look like that. And just keep going the whole way down. And my paint is very wet, so that I'll be able to blend that first one, because it'll still be very wet by the time I come back around. So don't be afraid to use enough water. All right, and then what you're going to want to do is connect those L's in the middle, but you want to connect it with a slight arc, which will show that it's a round trunk. You just want to connect them little thin line, like so. And then you'll notice there are gaps on either side of that initial trunk, and we'll work to fill that in next. If you didn't use enough water for your paint, then you're gonna have to do a little bit of scrubbing with your brush, which is fine. Like I said, the paper can handle it. So I'm just going to rinse my brush off, tap off the excess on the side of your water cup, and then I'm just going to use the tip of the brush because it's not a wide area. And just kind of move my brush back and forth to kind of fill in those gaps where there's like that white space. You want to kind of fill that in. Like so. See how it's all darker on one side? So we're starting to get some dimension in there. And then you want to do the same thing on the other side. Oh, I went into the paint. Needed to go into clean water. Do the same thing on the other side. Try to fill it in. If it got too dry and it's not moving that paint around, you can dip into your paint gently and just kind of fill that in. Okay, so you'll have a little bit of depth on either side, and the middle be kind of stark. Well, you want to clean your brush again and just go along that midline, the line that we made that little arc. Just want to just the bottom of the line there. You don't want to fill the whole thing in. You just want to kind of soften that line a little bit, just like how you did the lines on the side. Scrub at it if you have to. If your paint dried, you can have to scrub, scrub, scrub. And you're going to get something like that. You can see that my shade of brown that I mixed here is different from that one. And this also dried, so it dried a lot lighter. And then you're going to end up with those gaps in the middle where you want to put that texture. And all you do, now some of it will blend into what's wet already. That's fine. I'm going to mix up. My brown is a little red. Darken it up a little bit. And then just take the tip of your brush and kind of lightly put a few strokes in between to suggest that texture. You're just scribbling straight across. Same stroke that you made for the palm leaf, except instead of curving it, it's basically straight. And if you don't like anything, you can always clean your brush and blend it out. Like some of my edges look a little harsh, and I don't want that much definition, so I'm just kind of touching at it with a wet brush, and that'll blend it together. But you don't want it so blendy that you don't see those little scratch marks on there. And then I also want to put a little texture just by running the tip of my brush up and down on the base of the palm tree. Like so. It does look like an elephant trunk. I can't unsee that now.
Someone wants to know what color is the texture?
It's just the brown that I used, except when you put that second layer on there, it darkens up. I just put a little bit of black in my brown, not because I wanted to darken it, but I wanted to make it a little cooler because my brown was a little orange, a little red, which happens sometimes. I also didn't quite mix enough, which I do all the time. All right. So when you go back to your original palm, if you feel like it dried too light and you want more depth, you can mix up a darker shade of brown by adding a little more navy blue or a little more black into that brown. And then you can go over, so you can make one side of your palm tree a little bit darker. So I'm going to darken up this side. So I'm going to just trace over those backwards L's and half of the arc on the bottom, just like that. So again, focus there. Just gonna fill that in like so. And the fun part about a coconut tree is that you really don't need to be too careful or too specific. I mean, a palm tree. See how that just gives a little dimension to what you were doing? Like so. You could also go over some of those little hash marks. Just give it a little more texture. Yikes! Put my hand in the other palm tree. So you see how much more definition that has than before. And then I'm going to give that the bottom a little more definition too. And that's all that it takes to do the bark. And then we're going to go straight on to, I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to finish that up, and then we'll go on to the branches. Sometimes your paints will dry out a little bit, so while I'm waiting for you guys to finish your tree trunks, I'm just making sure my paint is fluid again. Add a little more yellow. Any questions?
No
All right.
question. What brand is your brush and what size? I think you said it was a 6, right?
Yeah, so this is a 6 and this is a silver black velvet. But the brand that I love the most for watercolor is the Simply Simmons brush that you can get at Michael's. And you can get a variety of sizes. I usually get like a 2. Now, if you're somebody that can't do these light strokes, like you just can't do that light pressure, go ahead and get like a size 0 brush. That way the size of the brush will just help you a little bit. I tend to use the same brush for everything and just vary my pressure. But if that doesn't work for you, by all means, go ahead and get a thinner brush. So I would usually get like a 0, a 2, a 4, a 6, and an 8. And if you're covering a large area, a 12 is good too. And these brushes are between $1.99 and $2.99, I think. Not this one. This one's not that much more. But those are really inexpensive and they're so good. I've been using them for about 4 or 5 years now and I really like them. All right, so we're gonna go on. We have about 30 minutes more, I think. So we're gonna start working on our canopy. So these are very droopy, swoopy trees. So some of them are more curved, some of the branches are more curved, some are less curved. Yours is going to look different from mine. So I'm just going to start by putting a branch going down like that. And then maybe one like that. And we'll start filling out the other side. And another way to get a point on your brush, when you dip into your paint, you can swirl your brush. When you swirl it, your brush comes to a nice tip. After some time using the same brush over and over and over again, they will lose their tips and they won't be as great for precision work like this. And then you just get a new brush, which is a bonus of having inexpensive brushes. And I've noticed that the expensive watercolor brushes after time lose their tips too. Maybe a little more time, but they still do. Okay, and then you can even overlap some, like maybe let's make this one go up here and come down and crisscross that guy. And we'll change the colors as we go on, but this is just to create the framework for it. So I want one here. Maybe we'll overlap another one here. And you just stop when you think it looks good. I'm going to stop for right now. I have 7. And if I think that I need more as I go on, I'll go on. So the same way I taught you over here how to do the leaves off of the branch, we're going to start. I'm going to follow that branch down and I'm just going to start feathering out some little leaves, just following that branch. And like I said, some of your strokes are going to touch. Totally fine. When you get to the end of your branch, you want to start going down a little bit, like so. Like that. And we just want to basically put in a structure here. We'll come back and do the crisscrossy strokes eventually. I'm just going to go over some of what I did, make sure I like it. Maybe I didn't do those strokes long enough. Maybe I want them to be longer, in which case I'll just go over it again. Try to skip some of those spots that didn't have paint before. And we're just going to continue to follow each one. And if they overlap and they touch, don't worry about it. That just makes it fun. And just work on the branch you're working on. So for instance, this branch and this branch intersect. I'm not going to stop here and work on this branch. I'm going to continue to the end of the branch. I'm committed to the branch that I'm working on. Because that's a surefire way to confuse yourself and to make your strokes go in weird directions. The only thing you want to do is try to maintain the same length of leaves on each branch. And sometimes one will get longer than the other and you'll have to kind of go back in and fudge out a few extra and pretend it was like that all along. Come to the end of the branch and we go downwards and out. Okay. So that's what we're looking like so far. Right? We're just establishing the shape. Now I'm going to go back to the one that's underneath that one. And I'm not worrying about it being underneath or on top yet. I'm just following that line. When I introduce my other color and I deepen things up, then I'll decide which one's in front, which one's behind, and color it to suit. Down. These probably got a little bit shorter than the others, so I'm going to go back in and lengthen it up a little bit. I didn't have enough paint. I'm going to mix up some more, which means there might be a slight variation in color, but it all works out. And you just work your way around. If you want to stop and start on this side, you can, or you can just go in order, whatever you prefer. And I'm moving my paper so I don't have to move my hand at an awkward angle.
Do you do just one color for now, Kris? Someone's asking.
Yes, just one color for now because I just want to establish my shape. And then after that, I'll go in. I mean, you can definitely add other colors right now if you want, but I usually do that on the second pass.
And then are you using a dark or lighter green?
This is the lighter shade of green, and then we're going to go in with the darker green after.
And someone's asking how you do the leaves in the back.
We're going to get to that.
Okay. All right.
Getting fuzz all over my brushes. So when you leave your paints open, just leave them long enough, long enough to dry. Don't forget about them for several days because there will be fuzz that flies into it and the fuzz will get into your brush and then it'll get into your paintings. And this is very forgiving in that you can go in and your next layer, if you decide you want your leaves to be more bushy or longer, you can do that. Or if you left too many gaps in between, you could fill that in, but we're going to fill that in with different colors. And then we'll also do that crisscross thing where you can see the leaves that are in the back. But for right now, this step is just all about establishing the shape of your palm tree. And this will also tell you whether you want to add another branch in there, or if you're just going to leave it like that, or sometimes you can add a branch that comes in front of the tree like here. And when you get the rhythm of painting those leaves in, you can go quite quickly. Okay, so I have my shape defined. Do I like it? Yes. Do I want to add more? No. If you want yours to be bushier and fuller, knock yourself out. Also, when we're doing our second layer, if you feel like you need some extra, you can. So maybe maybe I do want to show a little bit like that. So not a full branch, just a little bit sticking out in the back there. Kind of suggesting that there's multiple layers on there. I could do that if I wanted to. All right, so I'm taking the same shade of green, and also I have my dark green already prepped over here because we're going to introduce that second color. So make sure it's nice and made into a wash. I think that's a little bright, so I'm going to knock it down a little bit with some navy blue, a little bit of black. All right, so I have both of my colors prepared. So what I want to do now, I'm going to start by taking my original color. And if I need to fix anything, I can. Some of these I'm going to start doing that opposite leaf where you can see the second layer of leaves just a little bit. Just a suggestion. I don't want too much of it. I'm like not going to fill in the whole thing. Just a little bit. You just want to see a little bit of crisscross, not much. Some of it that's still wet, you're gonna see through it. It's gonna blend. Like these last few ones that I did are super wet right now. That paint is, I use a lot of water accidentally, which is fine. So what you want to do is take some of that original paint and kind of go over a few of your original strokes that you made just to wet the paint, right? This is a good time if you want to make the leaves a little bit longer. This would be the time to do it. Then this one, I think I'll be able to see a few little strokes peeking over the top. So I'm gonna put in a little bit of those little short top strokes that I showed you. I definitely won't see any on that. Okay, so now this leaf, you can see that shine. It's got a lot of water on there. So that's my opportunity to change my greens. I'm going to pick up some of that darker green and I'm just going to tap at it. I want to concentrate most of it on the inside of the tree, like that. That way you kind of darken up the inside a little bit. And then I'm just going to tap it in a few places, wherever that paint is wet, and let it mix. And watch that fun magic happen. At this point, if you want to introduce even another green, you can. I'm going to take some of that green along the line that we made for the branch just to define it a little bit, like so. And if you decide that you want another shade of green in there, you can go ahead and add it, but I'm going to stick to the two today just to make it easier. There you go. See? And so what you want to do is branch by branch, you want to add in the original color in most areas just to deepen it up, but also to re-wet the paint so that when you put this darker color, it'll sort of blend together. So I have a couple areas that are still wet from before, so I don't need to go into my original paint. Just gonna make some strokes. Now remember, we're committing to the branch we're working on. So if I were to go down here, that would be working on the other branch. So the branch I'm working on is here. And if you need a visual, you can just gently trace it a little bit with that darker color so you can see where you're going. Do you see that line there? And you don't want to fill the whole thing with that darker color. Just a couple strokes here and there just to give it some variation and some fun. Like so. And that's when it really starts coming to life. So on this sample here, I had my original yellow green, then I added that blue green a little bit, but in the middle here, I just added a little bit of black to that initial green, and I got that sort of olive green look just to darken up a couple areas. I'm not going to do that with this one. I'm just going to stick to two colors. All right, now we're going to go to this one that's in the back. So this one's in the back. I'm just going to darken up the area that you can see. So I'm going to follow that line so I know where I'm working. I'm just going to darken up that area a little bit. Just going to add some more dark leaves in there. And that just kind of shows that it's behind there, tucked away. It's a little bit darker, but you can see, because I outlined that top, that it's a different branch. And then that branch continues, trying to make sure I don't get paint on my hand, down here. So you could follow that line just a little bit so you can remember where you're working. And then we're gonna pull out a few leaves. If you wanted to join some of the leaves by putting a blob like that and then kind of picking away at it with the tip of your brush, that just gives it a little fun because you have that wet on wet technique happening there, like so. You can also try going backwards with a few strokes. And so far that's what we're looking like. I'm gonna switch and go over to the other side because I want to darken up some of the middle here so you don't see that line where your trunk ended. I'm gonna jump back over here for a second to do a couple of those crisscrossy background strokes while it's still wet. Forgot about that. Follow that line so I know where I'm going. And you don't even have to go the whole way down with darkening things up. You can just darken up some of the top. And what you can do, because remember watercolor dries a lot lighter. I like that color that we originally had, but it dried really light. So I'm just going to clean my brush of that dark and go back in to some of that original green. And if I go over it with that original green, it almost looks like a different color because it's a little bit darker. I'm gonna do a couple crisscross and then also some of those little tiny pieces on top that suggest that there is another layer of leaves behind there that we can't quite see. All right. Lorraine, are you still here? I got a pop-up message saying that I'm now the host of the event, so I'm not sure if you're still there or if you got kicked off. I'm gonna keep painting. No, we're not gonna do a background today. You can do a background if you want to, but it's just the palm tree. If we have a couple minutes after, I could kind of show you a little bit of a background, but no. Since I can see your chat questions, I think Lorraine may have gotten kicked off. I know that it's storming in Loudoun, so her internet may have kicked off. All right, so I can see the chat. So if you have questions, you can put in the chat. I'm going to go back into that dark color now, and I'm just going to keep doing the same thing. And funny enough, that green paint that I put on there first is still wet, so it's going to blend together nicely. Just going to follow that line a little bit. And it's sort of naturally looking like some branches are behind some other branches because of these color changes that we're making. That's kind of like happening on its own, which is neat. And I try to darken up the middle as much as possible because that's where all the branches come from. And so you can't ever really see too much white in the middle of those like you can in between these. And keep going until you fill it up completely. All right, so I just got a quick message from Lorraine, and she let me know that the storm did knock her off, and she is trying to get back on. Oh, there she is. All right.
Kris, have you been on this whole time?
Yes, so we've been painting away, so don't worry about that. I have lost my screen. Oh, there we we go. Got me back. You popped on and my screen popped off. Here we go.
I lost my power for just a blip, and
We
it was,
figured.
yeah, sorry about that,
No
everybody.
worries. We
Someone
just
wanted
kept
to ask a
painting.
question, so let's, Anvi, do you still want to ask a question? I just unmuted you.
Oh, they asked it.
Okay, good.
So what happened is, and this is probably a good thing to know, when you popped off,
Yeah.
I got a box that popped up that said that I was made the host.
Oh,
So I was able to see the chat question pop up, which was helpful.
okay. It might
So,
happen again, just
yep,
so
no
you know,
worries.
because it's
We
the
only have
storm.
about 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
But I guess that's good to know that if your power ever goes out, that happens. So,
That's a terrific feature. I'm really happy about that.
yeah.
Okay, sorry, everybody.
All right. So, do you see how there's more variation and a little bit more texture happening? It's because of those variances, so that we have that yellow green. So we have two different things happening here. We have the difference in colors. We have that light yellow green on the bottom. We have that darker bluer green on the top. So the color variance helps. But then we also have a value variance as a result of that, because that lighter green color was a lighter value and the darker green is a darker value. So like when you have a difference between light and dark, that makes it more interesting to look at any painting you do. And so that's my little palm tree. I just use different shades of green for here, lighter actually than this. So you'll notice the two palm trees are just never quite gonna look the exact same. If I decided that I wanted to add more branches, I could go in and add more branches, even at this stage if I wanted to. So if I wanted to have one come down in front of the tree, I can add that in like so. If I wanted another one up here, I can add that. And I also sort of smudge the paint here. So if I wanted to throw in another branch here to cover my goof, I can do that. That's the fun, forgiving part of palm trees. There's always a ton of branches. Now you can also mix it in and make it really realistic, because sometimes there's going to be a dead branch on the tree and that's going to be all brown. You can use that same brown that you used, and maybe half of it could be like green and half of it brown, like it's just starting to die off. Make it look really realistic. I'm going to add in a little bit of dark to there. Oops. And there you go. That's your palm tree. Now I think we have a couple minutes. I could show you how we do this little palm tree, which is more like a little illustration of a palm tree versus something this is not super realistic looking, but it's a little more realistic looking than this little fella down here, which I thought was very cute though, because he's palm tree-esque. So I'll show you how I did that. Oh, actually, for this one, I did the trunk first. And I made sure that the trunk was kind of really wet, so that when I went in with the yellow green, it mixed together. So then I just sort of created a few branches. And then, oops, what did I just, didn't rinse my brush. Now we have multiple colors. I just took the tip of my brush, kind of pushed down like a regular leaf. Just made a funky little, so put the tip of your brush down, push down a little bit on your brush, and then come back up in the direction that a palm tree would go in. This is just a little bonus. This isn't the regular palm tree that we did, but I had a lot of fun doing this. It just became a wonky little palm tree because, you know, palm trees have tons of different varieties that have different leaves and different shapes. It's kind of fun to do. And then I made a little cute little different kind of illustrative palm tree, which I think would be cute turned into a little planner sticker. Okay, what questions do you guys have for me about the palm tree that we painted earlier? Because we have a couple minutes left, I can take some questions. And another thing, Lorraine and I love to see your work. We love to see what you paint.
Yes.
So send us an email with your image, or Lorraine also will put the link to my private Facebook page. It is a group that you can join. Do you need me to send that again, Lorraine?
I need that again because with the storm, all of my chats were wiped out, Kris. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. I will send that to you. There you go.
Beautifully, but so different than your first one, right? Isn't that just amazing? Even the same artist gets a different outcome.
Completely different, and it's hard to replicate the same thing twice.
Sure.
Because you're going to be mixing different greens, different browns, and then you just do different shapes. So you guys can join my group. I have to approve you because it's a private Facebook group, and in there you can send me your images of what you did today, and I'll share it with Lorraine. You can ask for feedback on your artwork, ask questions. We have a lot of fun in there. And you can also email Lorraine or myself.
KrisLoyaArt@gmail.com, right?
Yes, KrisLoyaArt@gmail.com.
So one young attendee said she's too young to have Facebook. So you can send your picture to KrisLoyaArt@gmail.com. I just typed it in there for you.
Or you can have your mom or dad send, you can have an adult send me an email with your image as well. So that I can share it.
There it is. Yeah, we love to see what you've all done. And here's my email in case you want to contact me. It's beautiful.
So we just absolutely love to see what you paint. And if you have any questions that you didn't ask today, or you know, something that comes up later, feel free to send me an email to ask me about it.
Yeah, and I think we definitely will schedule that class for the basic skills.
Okay,
Watercolor basic skills. So I'll talk to Kris about that. Keep checking our events calendar on the website.
Yeah, and if you want a copy of this, send me an email and I will send it to you. That way you can teach your friends and family how to paint a palm tree when they come over, or even virtually.
2 palm trees cut out, put on a piece of paper, and a hammock in between them.
How fun is that? Or even, I mean, this would be a fun bookmark. Cut around it.
Yes. Oh, I would love a bookmark like that.
That would be pretty.
Beautiful. Yes. Perfect. And you get to see that.
And don't do what I'm doing here. Don't leave your brush in water. It'll destroy it.
Okay.
Always clean it off and take it out of that water as soon as possible. I'll show you what happens to a perfectly good brush when you leave it in the water. It starts by that peeling off, then the wood swells up, then this eventually pops off. The glue in here dissolves. It's a hot mess. Don't do
Oh,
it.
okay. Good
That
to
was
know.
literally a couple hours of forgetting.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah.
Any questions for Kris before we sign off today? And we'll have another watercolor workshop on Friday at 4 o'clock. And generally, we have one some sort of art class every Friday at 4 o'clock. Please join us. And I'd like you also to know that Kris is currently exhibiting her art at Gum Spring Library. And she did a beautiful job. If you get a chance to go over there and take a look at it, please do. And her
Thank you.
husband is exhibiting until the end of July in Brambleton, and his work is also beautiful, very
Thank you.
colorful and cheerful.
Thanks.
Abstracts, beautiful, both very talented. Oh,
Well,
someone
thank
said I
you.
saw her artwork there. It was awesome. Yay.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
Thank you all so much for attending. It's even though we can't see each other, it's still fun to know everybody's painting together.
It's still fun to paint with everyone. So thanks so much for painting with us today.
And we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.